I was listening to Last Podcast on the Left the other day,
Okay.
and they have these like midweek episodes that they
So right
do.
off the bat, straight away, right out the fucking gate.
Mm,
They're like a big podcast, aren't they?
yeah, yeah, they're one of the hugest of all the
They
podcasts.
continually keep coming up in because I still search for us on Reddit every now and again. Uh we haven't been recommended on Reddit for about 6 months.
Oh my gosh, we got to get it together.
Yeah, we do. But in every time somebody asks, "Hey, what's a good creepy podcast?" Somebody will always mention Last Podcast on the left. How did they reach the level of notoriety they've reached then? What did they do?
I mean, they were early to it. They've been around for like 12, 15 years, something like
Fine.
that.
Okay,
So
okay,
I
okay.
think being amongst the first is
Hmm.
definitely a big part of it. And then they expanded into like a network, LPN. So they have other shows on their network and stuff like that. Yeah.
That's now this is okay. So that's something that podcasts do, is it? So have
Hmm.
like sister podcasts, other podcasts, additional podcasts,
Right.
and put it under an umbrella.
Exactly.
Okay, well, we won't be doing that.
We will not be doing that. No, we will stay right here doing what we do. But I
Yeah.
was listening to last podcast, and
Yes.
they have midweek episodes that they do called side stories,
Mm.
where they just like sort of shoot the shit about weird stuff that's in the news or listener emails or whatever sort of comes across their desks, that kind of thing. And one of the hosts, Ed, he only joined the podcast like a year or so ago because one of the original hosts turned out to be an abusive douche canoe. Um,
Oh dear.
yeah, it was very
Another thing we're
unfortunate.
never going to do.
No, absolutely not. That is not a worry that you have to have
No,
about this particular podcast. No
certainly
abusive
not.
douche canoes. But uh I mention this because Ed, he came on to this about a year ago as like your sort of ultimate skeptic, right? Uh, when they talk about aliens and supernatural shit, he's generally just like, yeah, 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 whatever. That's not real, which is nice when you're listening to Last Pod because sometimes you're like Marcus and Henry can be like very like credulous about things. And you're like, you need that
Mm,
voice to come in and be like, come on, guys. That's
yep.
generally Ed. But after a year of listening to Henry and Marcus talk about the paranormal, something seems to have switched a little for my dear boy Eddie. Suddenly maybe he's not quite as incredulous as he was before. Maybe he can be convinced. And that is evidenced in this week's side stories, in which they discussed a gruesome phenomenon known as cattle mutilation. And
Oh,
no,
nice.
I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
mean
yeah, yeah,
Brian
yeah.
Danielson's brutal submission holds.
Excellent. Obviously, that's where my head went first, of course.
Naturally, yes.
Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
great topic.
Do you know anything about cattle mutilation, Marco?
Right. No, well, next to nothing, only that
Mm-hmm.
it's often reached for as a kind of a, little green men tropey trope, isn't
Sure.
it? They're coming up mangling the cows, stomping some crop circles,
Right. Yeah. I feel like you kind of
uh,
put it alongside the crop circle phenomenon, shit that happens on farms.
inserting something into a redneck,
Right. Yeah. Probing.
and then exactly, and then taking off back to Mars.
Right. Yeah.
Ack,
Exactly.
ack,
That's
ack.
that seems to be kind of the common conception
Yeah,
these days. Um, yeah.
that is actually, I
Happy.
think Mars Attacks. When I think cattle mutilation, I think Mars Attacks.
I love Mars Attacks. Just watch that
So
a
do
week
I.
ago.
I know you did. I know you did, and I'm the same. I fucking love Mars Attacks. There's an exhibition of art and props and ephemera and sketches of Tim Burton's on the Design Museum in London, which is running until April,
Ooh.
which I
Yeah. You gotta go.
absolutely have to get to.
Yeah. That'd be amazing.
Mm,
This is just a side thing, so don't let me go down the spiral too long. But so my friend Emily, uh,
mm.
who's like my best friend from college,
She a listener?
she no, she's not a listener. She's not really into creepy, spooky things. That's not her
Okay.
jam.
So I would have given her a little shout out, but no, I won't bother.
But she doesn't get one. No, but Emily, she's from San Clemente, in Southern California, and this is her dad grew up there as well. And this is where Tim Burton is from, and apparently they went to high school together and were like at least like
Mm.
vaguely acquainted with each other. And she said that her dad has told her about like how he basically all the like the art style that he has and everything is like all the stuff that he would just like draw in his notebooks. Like all the stuff that you see, he had like
Yeah.
honed that in high school. That was his
Yeah.
style. And when he started
Yeah.
coming out with movies, her dad was just like, that just literally looked like the stuff that he was drawing, doodling
Yep.
during class and stuff like that.
Found his groove early
Hmm.
on and
Yeah.
stuck to it. Love
Yeah,
that.
which is pretty fun.
Yeah.
Anyway, so back to cattle mutilation. From what I can gather, this is a pretty uniquely American phenomenon. I did Google like I looked like cattle mutilation UK and I found like a story from Wales, right? Things like that, but like it's not it's not widespread
No, no.
there. Despite the fact that cows exist all over the world, this is an us thing. And the New Yorker had a pretty good explanation of it in a 2023 article. They said cattle mutilation is characterized by, quote, cows drained of blood, their body parts, typically eyes, tongues, cheeks, and sex organs, removed with surgical precision.
Mm.
Yeah, some reported
I'm thinking like
mutilations.
cauterized clean wounds, just burned open.
Not necessarily. It's more
Okay,
just like the cuts themselves are
I see.
described as surgically precise. We'll get there.
Uh,
Some reported mutilations are accompanied by other strange and seemingly inexplicable signs. Circular depressions in the surrounding areas, animals with broken legs as if they've been dropped from great heights, predators that keep away from the carcass, perhaps sensing that something is amiss.
Love that.
As we'll get into, this phenomenon has been a going concern since the mid 20th century, but it was brought back into the popular conversation when Netflix's reboot of Unsolved Mysteries detailed the deaths of a bevy of cattle in Oregon, exhibiting the telltale signs of the mysterious mutilation.
Nice. I did see a burst sheep once that I couldn't explain. I was uh, walking towards my mum's house. I'd visited my mum, and there was a dead sheep on the side of the road. And I used the word burst very intentionally. It had burst, and I
Gross,
don't know
dude.
how. And the my abiding memory is seeing just loads of what looked like chewed grass just spilling out of this sheep's innards.
I
Ugh.
wonder if it's like I'm sure you've seen this. You've seen that video of the whale exploding, right?
Oh yeah.
I wonder if
Oh
it's
wow,
like
yeah.
it's like the gases build up in the belly or whatever, and it
Maybe.
just
Yeah,
like
maybe.
bleh, ends up bursting out. So it's probably like it didn't explode while the sheep was. I was about to say awake. Alive was the word I was looking for.
Yes.
It was probably like dead, and then like all the bacteria or whatever
Yeah,
went.
it could have been just totaled by a car for all I know, but
Yeah, or
it
that.
looked like it had just burst. Horrible.
Gross. Let's get into more gross things.
Please.
So yeah, so Netflix did an unsolved mysteries about this cattle mutilation spate in Oregon, and this, it seemed, broke Ed Larson's brain, largely because there simply seemed to be absolutely no explanation.
And
Nobody ever
I will
found.
ask questions. You say a spate. This is like a tightly packed
I will,
series of
yeah.
incidents. Oh,
Don't worry, I'll tell you
okay.
the
Yeah,
story. I
yeah.
won't leave you in the dark, Mark. I will
Oh,
tell
great.
you.
Good.
But nobody ever found a culprit for what was happening to these animals, so there's only one thing it could possibly be, and what is that, Mark?
Aliens.
Yes, aliens. Now, of course, this actually isn't the only theory that people have come up with, even in the realm of the paranormal or sinister. We'll come back to that as well. My point, as we get started here, is that the mutilation of cattle and other animals under seemingly mysterious circumstances has a vice grip on the American imagination. Ask anyone interested in it, and they'll likely tell you that no one has even come close to providing an explanation beyond the sinister and possibly otherworldly. And after listening to normally rational Ed Larson lose his mind over it, I began to wonder, is it really that mysterious? Do we seriously have no idea what's going on with these eviscerated livestock?
So your fella from LPOTL,
Mm-hmm.
this specific topic, cattle mutilation, was what caused him to lose that hard edge of
Yeah,
he's not so much a man of science when it comes to cattle mutilation. He's willing to
right.
entertain
Yeah.
the uncanny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was wild. He
Nice.
was like,
Okay.
literally just like, there's no other explanation, though. And I was like,
Mm.
this is interesting. So is it that? Yeah, that fascinated me. Like, is it really that like there is no explanation here, and that's why people go to this? And true mysteries in this world are few and far between, especially when it comes to something so brutal and widespread. So I
Yes.
figured I'd take a look and see if this is one of those rare times that we simply can't explain something away.
Yep. That's what this subject needs. It needs a dose of fucking, it needs Corrigan's
It
eye.
needed me
Corrigan.
on it.
Because if they're, you'll strip the last scintilla of doubt.
You know it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Come on, let's do it.
Now, this is going to be like a very Corey disclaimer here that nobody else cares about, but I feel like I should say. A thing
Huh.
about reading stories about cattle mutilations, whether they're from legit news sources or from crank paranormal websites, is that they're clearly all kind of getting their information like from each other or from the same sources.
Yep. Circular.
Um,
Yeah. Circular
yeah,
telephone.
exactly. And in a large part, they're coming from a 2011 article in the Journal of the Everyone, he's laughing because he used telephone, which is obviously the
Yeah.
American name of the game. This is
I'm
why
on a
we're
journey of
giggling.
growth, mate. I'm on a
You're on
journey
a
of
journey
learning
of
and growth
growth.
and healing.
It's wonderful. But yeah, I think a lot of articles are basically paraphrasing a 2011 article in the Journal of the Agricultural History Society by a Dr. Michael J. Goldman. So while I'm quoting some of those other articles, I'm also quoting Goldman directly because I think basically that's where they're getting most of their information from.
Mm.
And there's stuff I would love more specificity on, but lots of elements have just kind of been heard through the grapevine or telephone, if you will. They'll say news reports at the time said this, but there's no like reference to what that actual news report was or any quotes
Yeah.
from them. So I just want to get that out. Where I'm a bit vague, it's because these stories are being told like 27th hand at this point. But that's also kind of why stories like these take on this like unimpeachable quality. Like they've been passed along so many times, it's not like you can go and check and be like, actually, that's wrong. So this is kind of built
Yeah.
into the cattle mutilation story is this kind of somebody told me you had a cow
Yeah.
that
Which,
got murdered
and
by
look,
aliens.
not ever having ever and not really ever being likely to listen to last podcast on the left. I can't really speak to this fella's grip on science and fact, but surely such a seasoned scotcher as this fellow would have known that himself. I find it tough to kind of buy just why this particular phenomena
hmm
was what caused this.
Well, let's get into it. Let's
Yeah, yeah.
talk about cattle
Let's get
mutilation.
into it, as the one
Yeah,
alien said to the other when looking at a cow.
nice.
Yeah.
Or a
Yeah.
or a redneck for that matter. Uh
Hey, hello.
so it was the 1970s when the first big cattle mutilation flap happened. You familiar with the term flap?
Yeah, flap a brouhaha.
Yeah, right. It's like usually what people who are into aliens and stuff refer to like an incident, like a bunch of incidents is a flap.
Oh no, no, I didn't know that.
Oh,
Actually,
okay.
I was like, oh, oh, this guy's in a real flap. Like he's
Oh,
you know,
no, no, no. It's like, yeah,
stressy.
it refers to like sort of a group
Is it an
of,
acronym?
nope, just called a flap.
Hmm.
I don't know why it's called
So
that,
a
to
a
be honest with you.
cluster of unexplained, possibly alien
Activity.
related sightings is in the community known as a
hmm
flap.
Yeah,
Wow.
there you go. You've learned a new word.
Ah.
So yeah, 1970s when the first big cattle mutilation flap happens. On various small-scale ranches all over the western and midwestern United States, ranchers were reporting cows whose quote ears, eyes, rectums, and sex organs had been cut away
Oh,
with surgical precision. And this is
why
always the
why the
phrase.
rectum? Why you got to go to the rectum?
Listen,
You know?
I'm sorry, I'm just reporting the news here.
Oh, I'm talking to the cattle mutilators.
Right.
Why you?
Why?
All
Why
right,
the rectum?
go for the eyes.
Uh,
Fine. Why you got to go for the ass?
we'll get there. But
Mm.
this is always
Oh
the phrase,
well,
right? Surgical precision.
yeah.
And like when you hear that phrase, what does that make you think?
Surgical precision. It makes me think premeditated.
Sure.
It makes me think well equipped.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me think under cover of darkness,
Sure.
out
Yeah.
of public eye. It makes me think these people came to fuck up some cows, but with an agenda. This isn't just an opportunistic,
Right.
rectal destruction. This is premeditated rectal
Mm.
evisceration.
Totally. Yeah, when someone says something was done with surgical precision, we figure, well, then that can't have happened like randomly or by natural causes.
Yes, yes, good,
Someone,
yes.
yeah, someone with the technical know-how must have done this. And it even comes up in murder cases, like the Black Dahlia, for example. She was
Sure.
supposedly taken apart with surgical precision, so she must have been
Yeah.
killed by someone with medical training of some kind, right? Like it's
Mhm.
got those kinds of connotations to it.
Jack the Ripper.
Sure, yeah, exactly. People think he
Hmm.
might have been a doctor because of the surgical precision
Surgical
with
precision.
which he killed those victims. So by the end of the 70s, more than 10,000 of these mutilations had allegedly occurred in various places across the nation.
Mm.
But as all of my sources point out, those ranchers in the 1970s didn't generally attribute the incidents to aliens at that point, which has become common wisdom today. No, they thought the source of the problem was far more terrestrial. Do you have a guess?
No,
Put your
help me out.
tinfoil hat on.
Oh, all
Uh,
right, the government.
the government. Yes, exactly. The US government. And listen, there is plenty of reason for that. American ranchers were in a bad spot in the 1970s for various reasons, some
Mm.
unavoidable and some less so. For example, we started to be far more concerned about environmental protection in the 1970s, with the EPA having been created by the Nixon administration in 1970. This meant restrictions like limits on grazing on public land, which ranchers had previously relied on, and now they couldn't do that. Or they would have to like pay for grazing
Mm.
on land. And you may remember this coming up in the news again about a decade ago when a cattle rancher named Cliven Bundy ended up in an armed standoff with U.S. authorities after refusing to pay over $1 million in grazing fees for letting his cows graze on federally owned land adjacent to his ranch for 21 years.
Yeah, the farmers over here are furious, as I think I might have mentioned. You know,
Yeah,
they're
you mentioned.
protesting because of change in tax
Hmm.
exemption laws.
Right. Yeah, you're
Uh,
dealing with the same kind of
Mindset.
stuff here. Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah. And in this case with Cliven Bundy, it's wild because he amassed a full-on armed mob to fight off the government. And to this day, he's totally free and still grazing his fucking cows on public lands. A
Wow.
decade later, the
Yeah,
government just basically stood down.
he amassed a mob. I mean, these don't sound like jolly ranchers. You know, these.
No, no, they do not.
Huh?
Nicely
Huh?
done.
Yeah.
But yeah, it all goes back to these new rules that ranchers had been chafing at. They were also dealing with high inflation at the time. And the US government was sending a lot of our grain to other nations where there were food shortages, which caused the price of livestock feed domestically to go up. Perhaps one of the worst policies for the farmers came when Nixon answered inflation by imposing a price freeze on meat. This meant that despite rising costs to raise and feed cattle, ranchers would have to sell the meat at lower prices to keep the consumers from feeling the squeeze of inflation. The ranchers obviously didn't want to do that, so they decided to hold out on sending their cattle to slaughter until the freeze ended. And this spiraled into what came to be known as the wreck. Because the ranchers withheld their cattle, meatpacking plants had nothing to slaughter. And with nothing to slaughter, they had to lay off employees and close down their plants. By August of 1972, 140 meatpacking plants in America had fully ceased operation, which then led to beef shortages at stores, which caused the price of the beef to rise, even though the
Mm.
farmers weren't getting that money. And when the freeze finally ended, the cattle were too old and the meat they produced was fatty and gross, which ended up driving those prices down after all. So they'd waited out the freeze, killing off plants and jobs all over the country, only to then see the price per head of their cattle drop by 33%, and inflation still raising the price to feed them.
That's fucked, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just a
Isn't that fucked?
horrible
I mean, I
chain of
I
events.
I don't trust farmers, frankly, but
Right.
um
You have no reason to.
I can see how that would have led to some outlandish fucking behavior if, you're getting poorer and poorer, yet the price of the product that you sell is still
Right.
going up through no fault of your own. That's a tough
Exactly.
situation.
Hmm.
And then
Yeah,
you throw
definitely.
aliens into the mix.
Right. Well, again, at this point, most people are not putting aliens into the mix.
Okay.
But when cattle started dying in what appeared to be mysterious circumstances, they looked to the government, who had already kind of fucked them up at this point. And it wasn't unheard of for the government to fuck things up for ranchers and then lie about it. In 1968, they accidentally nerve gassed 4,500 sheep to death in Utah, and
Mm.
they didn't acknowledge that.
Accidentally.
Accidentally, it just like leaked out from somewhere and killed 4,500 sheep. And they didn't acknowledge they'd done that until a journalist obtained the unsealed files on the incident 30 years later. That was a big oopsie. They weren't trying
Mm.
to do nefarious shit. They were just bad at whatever they were doing and caused mass sheep death. But then they lied about it and covered it up. So the farmers, of course, were like, I think the government killed my sheep. And the government was like, we don't know what you're talking about.
Sure.
And so you can see why people would have been like, stuff starts happening. Did the government do this? Right? They're not
Mm.
going to tell me. They're going to lie about it. As with any conspiracy theory, though, the question is always to what end, right? Like if you ask
Exactly.
why, a lot of times
Exactly.
you're going to get stuck at that. So why exactly would the government be sneaking onto small ranches and surgically removing the soft tissue of animals and then leaving without a trace? Is it a social experiment? Are they experimenting on the animals? Are they just being assholes? I go
Uh,
ahead.
Even though the sources are circular,
Hmm.
um, are you confident in the MO of these different clusters of bovine
Yes.
mischief being having the same kind of telltales, the same signs, the same
Yeah,
surgical
and we'll get
precision?
to that.
That was in common across
Yeah,
all
all the way
clusters.
across the
Okay.
board. Yeah, for sure.
Mm.
Um,
That
and
makes it
there's a
more
couple
difficult for me to
reasons
believe
for
that it
that.
was governmental.
Right, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Like if it's interference from the government over
Mm.
decades or whatever, iffy on
Of
that.
course. Yes.
Tens of thousands of these happening. But yeah, you have to ask why, of course. And I didn't really find many good explanations as to what people thought they were doing, aside from like a short mention in the New Yorker that folks considered biological weapons tests a potential culprit. And in fact, I think it was the Agricultural Journal article that mentioned there was like one shitty journalist, like sensationalist journalist, who tried to say that it was a biological weapon that they were trying to craft specifically to only kill Asian people so that they could use it in Vietnam.
Whoa.
Yeah,
What? That was a fucking hard hard turn.
right. Yeah, comes out of nowhere, right? Excuse
Huh.
me? Yeah, this was printed apparently. A journalist actively printed that in a paper. So
Wow.
that's the kind of thing I guess that you could potentially say the government was doing. I
Mm.
don't know. The to what end element of this is pretty vague to me. But I also like I didn't spend a lot of time going down like the rabbit holes of like deep conspiracy theory websites. I just find them brain numbing to read. So
Yeah,
they
it
may
saps
have
at you, doesn't it?
yeah, especially because it's like trying to understand their logic is difficult. Like even if I were reading their explanations for what the government was doing, I would probably be just as in the dark afterwards as to what
Mm.
they think is going on. It doesn't usually make a lot of sense. But suffice to say that for whatever reason, people thought the government were interfering with their cows, going so far as to claim that they had been chased by aircraft or that they'd seen shady unmarked helicopters hanging out over the sites of the mutilations. At least once, someone actively shot at a helicopter that was out inspecting power lines, and another rancher shot at a helicopter in Colorado just because he was just frustrated about the whole ordeal. So he just shot a helicopter.
Pew. Yeah.
Yeah, might as well. The danger that came from a bunch of armed cattle ranchers on edge led to the BLM having to stop doing aerial land surveys in eastern Colorado, and the Nebraska National Guard was told to fly their helicopters a full 1,000 feet higher than was standard to avoid getting shot.
BLM?
The Bureau of Land Management
Thank you. Yes, of course. I was
is
thinking, for some
Black
reason, my
Lives
head went
Matter.
to bovine lives matter.
Oh, nice. If you recall from season one of The White Lotus,
Yeah, yeah.
this does cause confusion with what's her face? What's the gal we all love?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but I can see her in my
Jennifer
mind's
Coolidge.
eye. Jennifer
Yeah,
Coolidge. There we
and she
go.
thinks
I can bring
that
her face to mind, whereas you can't do that.
I can't do that, no. But she thinks that John, what's his face's character works for Black Lives Matter and he works for the Bureau of Land
Very good.
Management.
Your next drawing challenge is to try and draw Jennifer Coolidge from memory. I'd love to see
Can you imagine?
it.
Oh my gosh. Well, if I remember afterwards, I will try to draw Jennifer
Thank you.
Coolidge.
That'd be great.
Anyways, so Colorado Senator Floyd Haskell wrote to the FBI begging for an investigation to be opened, saying, quote, "The ranchers and rural residents of Colorado are concerned and frightened by these incidents. The bizarre mutilations are frightening in themselves. In virtually all cases, the left ear, left eye, rectum, and sex organ of each animal has been cut away and the blood drained from the carcass, but with no traces of blood left on the ground and no footprints."
See, that's so interesting to me because, listen, I've never mutilated a single cattle, right? I don't,
No,
it's
not
not
a
something
one.
I do.
Mm.
Um, but that doesn't strike me as something that is like a straight in, straight out job. That's not a quick
Right, yeah.
endeavor, is it?
Feels complicated. Yeah,
Yeah, and if you're going to make them all look identical,
sure. And I don't
you'll
know
have
if
to
they
have like
look
a playbook.
identical. I think there are
Right, okay.
differences in how they look. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I will say I don't think that's the case, but these are all the commonalities that they have between them. He
I
went on
see.
to say, quote, "Clearly something must be done before someone gets hurt."
Mm.
But the FBI was like, a bunch of gross dead cows are none of our business. That's not our jurisdiction, and declined to get involved, which is kind of understandable. On the one hand, the FBI washing their hands of it does nothing to stop people from thinking the government's in on it and covering it up. Like, certainly that validated people's feelings. On the other hand, it's literally just dead livestock. That is very clearly not FBI
Mm.
business. So
Could you give me some idea as to, you know, per incident? Is it just the one cow, or are we talking like 10, 15 cows per
I think it's
incident?
generally one cow per
Right.
incident. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not like the whole field
The
is
whole
killed or anything like
herd.
that. The whole herd. Yeah, no, it's not like that. Maybe
Herd.
a couple, but I honestly feel like it's like one per incident in these cases.
Yeah.
Um,
You're going to be wiped out after doing one of those,
right.
aren't you?
Seriously, gotta go home, take a bath,
Mm.
ice yourself.
Unless it's
Um,
aliens.
well, right, that's true.
Mm.
Various state investigative bodies and task forces in places like Oklahoma, Colorado, and New Mexico dug into these incidents and tried to get to the bottom of them. According to the New Yorker, in Minnesota, two prisoners said the mutilations had been blood sacrifices carried out by a, quote, hell-oriented biker cult, which I guess is a colorful way of saying Satanists.
Yep. Not
They're
quite satanic. They're not
hell-oriented.
all the way
Yeah.
Satanists,
They're
but they
just kind
are
of,
hell
they're
adjacent.
leaning hell ways.
Hell, yes. They're hellbound.
And the follow-up parenthetical in this in this article is so good. So they say these two criminals, right? Two prisoners say that it was these guys in a hell-oriented biker cult. The parenthetical says the prisoner tipsters claimed fear of retaliation and requested transfers to smaller facilities, from which they both ended up escaping.
Yay. Well done, lads.
Imagine tricking a legitimate government agency into thinking you have secret knowledge about a satanic cult hacking up cows, then
Which you
convincing
then
them that they
parlay.
need convincing them they need to transfer you to a different facility because knowing this puts them in danger, and then breaking the fuck out.
That's fantastic.
A
I mean, it
plus
calls
work.
their story into question. But as
Does,
far
yeah.
as a plan goes, fair play, lads.
Nailed it. They deserve their
Lateral
freedom.
thinking, yes.
Yes. Unfortunately, I think they both were caught anyway afterwards, but still. In 1975, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation opened up a 19-month inquiry studying over 200 mutilations and sending 35 carcasses to Colorado State University to be necropsied. And we will come back to this.
Yeah, I had no idea that cattle mutilation was such a widespread phenomena.
Right. Yeah.
This is
I didn't
truly
either.
surprised me. Yeah, I had no clue.
I thought this was like a thing that occasionally,
Yeah.
occurred somewhere and someone made like a big
Like,
deal out of it, but
yeah.
lots of
Or
them.
had been debunked like crop circles
Right.
and then just stopped. It isn't still happening, is it?
We'll get there.
Okay. Ooh. I'm eager.
In fact, we're getting there right now. Let's get
Okay,
to modern times.
cool.
And I want you to pay attention here, okay? This is, let's get into this mystery. I want you to listen carefully, ask questions if you needed to or whatever, but
Okay, okay. Lock in,
lock in.
as the kids say.
Hmm. Right. Let's get down and dirty into this mystery. First, 2021,
Mm.
a case that ended up on this season of Unsolved Mysteries. We're in Crook County, Oregon, where rancher Ricky Shannon claims that one of his cattle had been found dead with an odd cut down its spine. According to Shannon, there were no tracks to or from the cow, no blood surrounding it, and the cow's left cheek, tongue, and 3 of its teats had been cut away cleanly. The eyes were untouched. There were no bullet holes, no vehicle tracks, and supposedly no predators or birds had touched it. A few days later, rancher Casey Thomas reported that one of his 5,000 cows was found dead and lying on its side, hair removed near the stomach, its udders cut off, and its left
Mm.
cheek, tongue, and sex organs removed.
The tongue and the cheek, that's fascinating to me. There's
Mm,
something to that.
there is. Yeah, okay. I like it. I like it. So,
Uh,
there was an uneven patch of hair missing between its front legs, and in the middle of that what appeared to be a prick mark. The next day, a reported wolf kill came in. When the authorities got there, an udder had been removed, a circular cut made around the anus, and its reproductive organs removed without puncturing the gut. The left cheek, left eye, and tongue were all removed. Sergeant Timothy Durheim noted that there were straight, clean incisions where the cheek had been, that he'd found a puncture wound between its neck and shoulder, and that he saw no bite marks or human or animal tracks in the immediate surroundings. There was also minimal blood.
DNA,
DNA.
DNA.
I,
Any
I
kind
don't
of
think they took
okay,
DNA in this
okay.
case. And like, what would they take it of? Because they don't have any like prints or hair or anything like that.
Yeah,
As far as they can tell, they don't see that
but I mean,
anyone's been here.
I would be going straight for the circular cuts around the anus,
Sure.
and I would be swabbing those anal lesions,
I hate it.
and I would be seeing what it showed up. Run it through the
Mm,
old lab.
sure. Well, not long after, another cow was found, more decomposed than the others, but with its left cheek removed and a 2-inch patch supposedly cut into the hair on its neck.
Okay.
So 2023, 2 years later, another case caught the public eye in Texas. 6 cows found dead alongside a highway with their tongues removed, allegedly with no blood spill and a straight, clean cut with apparent precision.
Mm.
Each cow came from a different pasture, and they were all found in different locations along the highway. A circular cut had been done to remove the anus and external genitalia on 2 of the cows, and similar precise cuts were noted around the jaw lines of the cows. According to
Terrible.
it's pretty gross. According to CNN, officials reported that, quote, there were no signs of struggle or blood spill, and no footprints or tire tracks in the area around any of the cows. So our cattle mutilation stories are similar but have changed shape a little, right? Rather than being framed in such a way that the big bad government came and did it, we've got something going on that says no human could possibly have done it. There's no tracks of any kind, no footprints, no tires. Predators won't come near the carcasses. There's now some sort of puncture being made to the animals in the process.
Mm. Mm.
But
The
otherwise,
shaven
it's
hair, the
the
missing
shaven hair.
teeth.
Right. Otherwise, it's more or less the same, right? Cattle dead, missing genitalia, cheeks, tongues, minimal blood in the area, animals looking like they've been drained. Um, so what happened, do you think? Do you have any guesses from any of this yet?
Jesus. So let's take the Sherlock approach to this, right?
Okay.
And let's pare back everything that it isn't.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, love that.
What it isn't is aliens. Sorry, Ed, it isn't aliens,
Why not,
right?
Mark? Why not?
Well, because it's absurd to even entertain the fact that it would be aliens, right?
Okay.
It isn't aliens. I know that it isn't aliens, right?
Okay. Sure.
I don't believe it to be the government
Okay, why not?
because, as you said, to what end?
Mm-hmm.
And in much the same way as any other kind of high level deep state conspiracy theories, la la la, the effort to execute that and then to keep it
Right,
quiet for for as long as it has been quiet, it doesn't ring true, right?
right. Mm-hmm.
So it's by human hand.
Okay.
That's all I've got. What I am certain of is that it's human and it isn't the government and it isn't. It's obviously a pattern. It's obviously a plan that somebody is executing,
Okay.
but what their motivation can be, what they hope to gain, I'm sorry, I as yet have nothing.
Love it. Dear listener at home, maybe take a moment, pause, ruminate on what
Yeah.
Mark has said, ruminate on what I have said. Do you have any theories? Where do you think this is going? Maybe write it down. Feel
The
free to post it on our Facebook
for
and then hit
me,
play again. Yeah.
the the big the big head scratcher here is the teats and the anus,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
If you know, even if you want to stage or set up a fucking crazy event, ah, maybe that's what you would do then, isn't it? You would purposely
Yeah, sure.
do it in a weird way.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a pickle. This is a real pickle here, Corey.
Do you want to know what
Oh, you've cracked it. You've
yeah. I have an answer for you.
oh, right. Am I close? Am is it human? It's humans.
It's not humans, no.
Eh.
You ready to find out the
No, not
answer to
yet.
cattle mutilation?
No,
Oh,
no, I'm
okay.
not. I'm not. It
Okay.
isn't a predator because of the
Do you want
surgical.
me to answer or not? This is the thing. Like, do you want me to
No, I'm
respond
thinking
to
out
your
loud.
guesses?
I'm giving my
Process it.
idea.
Okay. Then I will not.
Exactly. You
You
know I need to say
process.
things out loud. The surgical precision, the lack of blood, the similarities in the MO. I'm talking about the teats and the anus,
Right.
the
That does
cheeks,
seem to be the sticking point.
the teats, the circular shaven
Potatoes, tomatoes.
teats, teats and anus. Uh fuck. Right. My best guess is it's a person or group of people, much like crop circles,
Mm-hmm.
who are doing it for the mystery, for the notoriety, to see it come up in the paper and to have a little titter to themselves. It's crop circles, but way, way, way darker and more widespread and weird and more involved.
Do you want to know the answer?
Go.
Okay. Let's go back to those tests in the mid 70s in Colorado that I said we'd return to, right?
Oh, what
Sends all
for?
those sends all those carcasses in Colorado in the
Right.
1970s to the university
Yes. Yes.
for
Yes.
necropsy and all that
Yep.
stuff.
Yep.
So according to Goldman, people who actually knew about animals, namely veterinarians and veterinary pathologists, were skeptical of the whole story from the jump. And the necropsies performed on the dead cattle pretty much proved them right. We talked about this when we discussed the Dyatlov Pass incident.
Sure.
Scavengers are pretty predictable in the stuff they'll take from a carcass. It's the soft tissue that they go for. Work smarter, not harder. So the
Fine.
anus, genitalia, udders, tongue, ears, eyes, and cheeks are exactly what you'd expect to find missing on any dead animal that had been left out long enough for scavengers to start
Come.
picking at it.
Why did you put that fucking woman singing at the fucking supermarket into my head? Greens, peas, anus, teats, potatoes, tomatoes. Amazing. I got my teats, got my anus, got my cheeks, got my eyes, got my
Oh
tongue, got
no.
my hooves, got my mouth.
This has gone beyond me, I think. Uh so yeah, so these are the areas that scavengers usually pick at. And that doesn't take long to start. Scavengers responsible for this can include coyotes, foxes, vultures, magpies, bobcats, badgers, and even just plain old flies. Quote, these scavengers can even make what may appear to be precise cut marks along the edges where they've consumed the flesh. What about the lack of blood? You
Yep.
might ask. The idea that there should be a ton of blood comes from the assumption that the only way these cows would be dead and mutilated like this would be if some sort of predator attacked them. And that certainly would result in blood spatter and gore all over the place.
Not to mention tracks.
And tracks, of course, yes. But Goldman wrote, quote, livestock deaths are common on ranches and usually result from diseases like blackleg, lightning strikes, or gastrointestinal problems resulting from the consumption of nails, barbed wire, and pieces of metal. In 1974, the USDA estimated that 6.1 million cattle deaths had occurred over the course of the year, which equates to 4.5% of the overall cattle population of 131.8 million head. The number of deaths in 1974 was actually down from 1973's unusually high year that totaled 6.5 million. For a rancher to find a dead cow in a pasture would not have caused a stir in most situations, except if the condition of the carcass raised some suspicions. In other words, the cows likely didn't meet a violent end. They dropped dead from one of a number of things that regularly cause cows to drop dead. And indeed, at times in which there have been an uptick in reported cattle mutilations, there hasn't been an uptick in cattle deaths overall. The same amount or fewer cattle are dying during these flaps. Their deaths are just being interpreted differently. So again, why do the cows appear drained of blood? That's just a fun thing called livor mortis, where blood coagulates during decomposition and gravity causes it to pull closer to the ground in the animal's body cavity.
Yep. As elaborated on during our stages of death.
Right, exactly. Yes, same thing happens to
Conversation.
people. All
Yeah.
animals, this happens. But this would look to the untrained eye like the blood got sucked out of it. If you just turn the animal over, you'd find it. It's all there.
This doesn't satisfy me.
The lack of tracks. Brian Dunning, host of the Skeptoid podcast, which had an episode debunking cattle mutilation theories in 2015, said the incidents reported here were just standard bird predation. Birds don't leave footprints or tire tracks.
Perfectly circular shaven patches, though. This doesn't satisfy
Nobody
me.
said shaven. They said missing hair. Yeah, this is where like your brain starts to fill in.
Filling in the gaps.
It's
Yep.
filling in the gaps here. Some of those veterinary pathologists did find evidence of human involvement in some of the mutilations, but not in the deaths. So while no one was ever arrested for being involved in mutilations, there's every reason to believe that at least in some of these cases people hoaxed it. They went out, they saw their dead cow, and they set it up to look like there had been a mutilation here.
To get a little bit of notoriety,
Yeah.
get their 15 minutes.
Exactly. But generally, there wasn't hoax involved as far as we know. These were just regular deaths scavenged by regular scavengers and interpreted weirdly by ranchers having a real hard time with the government. This is only validated by the fact that large-scale ranchers with powerful lobby groups behind them didn't report any cattle mutilations and were skeptical of the whole phenomenon. It was only folks who were already disillusioned with the government and convinced they were out to get them that saw something sinister in very normal cattle death. And as you could imagine, media coverage only fueled this. And I think this part is where you're going to go, oh, yeah, okay, no, I see it. This will satisfy you.
I hope so.
The New Yorker refers to it as a sort of pre-internet meme, a contagious story that shaped how ranchers saw and interpreted dead cows. This great quote from this article, from what's known as the Rommel Report, which was an investigation conducted in New Mexico by retired FBI agent Kenneth Rommel, I think will speak to what you're not convinced about yet.
Okay.
He wrote, quote, after examining the carcass and noting the jagged and torn appearance of the injuries, I asked the owner whether he really thought the damaged areas could be described by the term surgical precision. He replied that the damage did appear, quote, a bit rough. I then asked where he obtained the term surgical precision, and he said it was commonly used in the newspapers.
Oh, come on.
And this is, I mean, that gets to the heart of it to me. Like, if you, Marko, a humble, what's your job title?
Oh, don't worry.
No, give me the job title. Just
learning and development business partner.
A humble learning and development business partner from Bicester, England, stumbles upon a mutilated corpse, whether cow or sheep, like you said before, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Would you be able to say with any authority if it had been dismantled with surgical precision as opposed to someone, say, sawing it in half with a chainsaw?
Now, I'm not the right example here because I firmly believe that I could.
Okay, I'm
Uh,
not surprised by that.
anyone else? Yeah, probably not. Me, I would be able to ascertain that accurately, yes.
I'm
But
not as convinced,
I get where you're
but
coming
yes,
from. I get where you're coming from.
right. We can at least say generally people do not have the expertise to be able to judge that. Certainly,
Mm.
cattle ranchers don't have the expertise to judge that. They just heard it so many times that it became a part of their vernacular. This has been cut with surgical precision. Like, was it?
Mm.
Or is that just the
Both,
term
yeah,
that you've
yeah.
heard for finding the ass of your cow all cut up weird,
Where it ought not to be.
where it ought not to be? The Rama report also noted that while these mutilations might look pristine from a distance, up close you could usually see tooth marks, as well as where the blood had pooled in the animal's extremities from that coagulation. So ultimately, cattle mutilations aren't mysterious at all. They're not even that interesting. Sorry, Ed Larson. They're actually extremely easy to explain, but people are complicated.
You
When
got
these
that right.
things first started, ranchers were having a real bad go, and their anger at the government manifested in this mistrust that caused them to attribute any misfortune to nefarious interference. They weren't
I
necessarily intentionally lying about what's happening, but they saw what they wanted to see.
right.
Just like we talked about last week, like people who want to believe in paranormal things do. Were the cuts really surgically precise? No. Were scavengers really avoiding the carcasses? Probably not. They probably went away when people came close.
How
Uh,
does right? Sorry though, right?
Go ahead.
But how does a scavenger? How does a scavenger animal remove an anus in such a way that it doesn't just cause an absolute fucking, bloodbath, a scene?
That's apparently how they always do it. That's a normal thing for a scavenger to do. Well, and also keep in mind the animals died. They're not killing the animal. So the blood is already pooling away from places like the
All
anus.
right.
So it's not
Mm,
going to bleed after this thing has already, all of its blood is pooled on the other side of its body. It's going to
mm.
be pretty
What kind of
clean.
scavengers are we talking about here? Coyotes?
Yeah, I gave you that. Let's see. Uh there was a list in here. Hold on. Here we go. Coyotes, foxes, vultures, magpies, bobcats, badgers, and flies.
I can't. I think I'm Team Ed more than I am Team Scavenger or
Hmm.
natural causes. That doesn't ring true at all.
Well, the scientists who study these things all the time said it's very clear. It's not even like vaguely unclear. It's like if you look
Mm.
at these and look at how scavengers eat, it is all the hallmarks of normal scavenging behavior. It's
And
just
if the scientists say
I mean,
so,
like I said, this was the same thing that came up with Dyatlov Pass, that
yeah.
the exact same parts of the people were missing there too. And, scientists looking at it and trying to get past all the conspiracies were like, that's literally just, it's just predators. Those are the parts they eat. They're gonna go for all those bits. And if you're a bird with a sharp beak or whatever, and you're
Mm.
eating at a cow's ass,
A
it's
hankering
probably
for
gonna
some
look
anus.
like yeah, it's probably gonna look like someone took a razor to its
Uh,
butthole or
all
whatever,
right. Yeah, okay, okay, okay.
So yeah,
Talk me
all of
round.
that. So all the bits were completely normal for these things to take. These are typical things meat-eating animals come after. The animals weren't drained of blood. You would easily find that blood if you just flipped the animal over. Um, and these were obvious things to scientists who look at it, but these ranchers who are not veterinarians did not know any of this stuff and had a reason to distinctly be blind to it because
Of course. of the media and what they're reading and
Right.
seeing, and
Yeah.
their
And their
yeah, okay,
mistrust of the government and all of that
yes,
kind of stuff. So, in the end, cattle mutilation is a great big nothing burger. It's just normal scavengers eating cows. But it is super gross. That's what happens to cows after they die.
yeah. I mean, I look. If you really want to know how I feel right now, it feels as though the world just became a little less magical.
I see it and I am sorry. That is what I
Yeah,
do is I just suck the magic
well,
right out of the
we're gonna.
universe.
All right.